My name is Amelia. I didn't grow up rich, but I still managed to get a job and get married. My husband's name is Edward, and he works at a fancy hotel. I thought my life would be a fairy tale, but things didn't turn out that way. My childhood home wasn't wealthy. We didn't have a lot of money, but I don't blame my parents at all. They gave up nice things for me, took me to fun places, and taught me about different cultures. Maybe they loved geography, but as a kid, I often thought they were trying too hard for me. I didn't want my parents to worry about me anymore, so I decided to start working right after middle school. My mom would say, "You should at least finish high school." It might be hard to find a job without it, and my dad would agree, "Yes, we have enough money saved to send you to high school." I was really happy about how my parents felt, but more than that, I really wanted to make life easier for them as soon as possible. It's okay. The sooner I start working, the sooner I'll start earning more, I said, not very sure of myself. But like my parents said, there was no guarantee I would find a job. During that time, I had a friend named Jessica who had moved here from another country when we started middle school. Her family wasn't rich either, which might be why we got along so well and always hung out together. Jessica could speak some English, so we managed to communicate. Without realizing it, I started learning Spanish by talking with her. By the time I was in ninth grade, I could speak Spanish pretty well. Maybe it was my Spanish skills that helped because, surprisingly, a travel agency decided to hire me. They saw value in my ability to speak Spanish. Jessica and I, having both left school after middle school, started working and gradually lost touch. I focused on my job, determined to earn money. Time passed quickly, and soon I was 26 years old. I often used a lounge in a hotel for work. It was a fancy but cozy place, and the snacks and coffee were reasonably priced. We had our meetings there with the staff. The waiter working there at the time was Edward. The hotel hosted many foreigners, so he spoke Spanish too. Sometimes I would be there with foreign guests. Maybe because we both spoke Spanish, we connected right away. Edward started a conversation, and before I knew it, we were in a whirlwind romance that led to marriage. For a girl from a poor family, getting married was a big deal. I expected to start an exciting new life. However, reality was quite different. When we were getting married, Edward had a request. "If it's okay with you, Amelia, I'd like us to live at my family home." His father had passed away a few years ago, and he was worried about his mother living alone. Her energy levels were dropping, and having someone around to help her seemed like a good idea. Since I worked remotely, Edward thought it would be convenient for me to stay home, look after his mother, and handle the household chores. On the flip side, Edward often worked long hours and wasn't home much. With his rare days off, having me, a home-based worker, around must have seemed like a good arrangement to him. But I couldn't agree to it right away. When I first visited Edward's family home to introduce myself before our marriage, his mother reacted strangely after asking about my education. "Amelia, which university did you graduate from?" she asked. When I honestly replied, "Well, I didn't go to college. I only finished middle school," my mother-in-law went silent and just looked at me. Her expression showed she looked down on me. "Oh, middle school, well," she said, eyeing me with disdain. Because of this, I thought living with her might not be easy, so I mentioned my concerns to Edward casually. "Edward, do you think your mom has some doubts about me?" I asked him. He chuckled a bit and replied, "Nah, that's not true. Mom trusts me, and I'm sure she doesn't have any bad feelings toward my wife either." His words made me think maybe I was worrying too much. Edward also promised that if any issues arose, he would talk to his mother for me. With that reassurance, I agreed to move in with his family. But once I started living there, things weren't as smooth as I'd hoped. It was a harsh reality check. Whenever Edward and I visited his family's house, his mother would speak to him with such warmth. "Edward, thank you. I'm so grateful you're living with me," she would say, and Edward would respond, "Of course, I knew it would help you out." They seemed like such a close mother and son. But towards me, my mother-in-law's attitude was completely different, cold even. "Well, Amelia, just make sure you don't hold Edward back," she'd say emotionlessly, as if she was giving orders to a servant. It was clear she still looked down on me, but at that moment, Edward stood up for me. "Don't worry. Amelia is doing a great job working too," he said. However, when I mentioned this, My mother-in-law briefly looked stern, a detail I didn't miss. I figured I should talk to Edward if things ever got troublesome and decided to handle it my way. We were family after all, and I didn't want any tension between us. That's how we started living together, but reality didn't bend in a favorable direction. Once, as I was working on my computer as usual, my mother-in-law burst into my room and said angrily, "Hey, Amelia, when are you going to clean my room? It needs to be done by 10 o'clock a.m. every day." I was surprised because I had never heard of such a rule before. Sure, I agreed to do household chores, but we never discussed to what extent. If she had just told me kindly from the beginning, that would have been fine. After all, I have my own job and can't be available all the time. However, arguing wouldn't be mature, so I quickly finished my work, apologized, and started cleaning her room. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was just relaxing in the living room, watching TV and eating snacks. Edward had mentioned concerns about his mother's health, but she seemed well enough to clean her own room. I had imagined she might have difficulty walking, but she was more lively than I thought. Once the cleaning was done, she immediately ordered, "Now start making dinner," and I like it plain. I won't tolerate anything too strong. She even told me to go shopping for ingredients right away. I thought it was too early to start cooking, but I decided to get it done and return to my work. When I got back from shopping, my mother-in-law was surprisingly still relaxing. It was hard not to feel annoyed, but I chose to hold back and just finish what needed to be done. I thought maybe she was testing me, hoping she'd understand in time, but that hope lingered for months. There were days when she complained about me being just 5 minutes late with the laundry or that the bathtub wasn't cleaned perfectly, nitpicking to an almost obsessive degree. Before I knew it, I ended up doing all the chores around the house, while my mother-in-law just lounged around. Honestly, if she had the energy to nitpick, she could very well do some chores herself. I started to worry that if this continued, it would start affecting my job too. That was the last thing I needed, so I decided to wait until the evening to talk to Edward about it. Once my mother-in-law had gone to bed, I told him everything. "Hey, I think your mom just doesn't like me. I'm getting so tired of being constantly criticized." But Edward just chuckled and said, "Come on, that can't be true. Mom's a kind person. There won't be any issues as long as Amelia doesn't do anything strange. Please try to get along with her." He didn't believe me. Maybe it's because she's always doting on him and never complains to him. In fact, when Edward's around, my mother-in-law says, "Amelia, why don't you take a break and have some tea?" But even knowing that, there's a limit to my patience with this kind of life. I spend all day doing household chores and end up having to work on my job at night. To be honest, my trust in Edward is starting to fade. If nothing changes, I might just collapse from all the stress. Then, in the midst of all this, my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Amelia, I'll be away for about a week in about 3 months from now, so make sure you keep the house in order, okay?" She sprang this on me out of nowhere. When I asked what was going on, she said, "Edward suggested we go on an overseas vacation." That's my boy, always knowing. I was thrilled at the thought of traveling abroad. I couldn't wait, but when my mother-in-law dropped the bomb about the vacation, I was shocked. Edward hadn't mentioned a word of it to me, and it seemed like I was being left out, expected to stay behind and manage the house. I needed to talk to Edward about this right away, so I brought it up that night. His response was surprising. "Oh, Mom already told you, but you're coming too, right?" It turned out we had misunderstood each other. It seems my mother-in-law had lied to me. Even if Edward wants me to go, I can't possibly enjoy a trip with her. In frustration, I told him, "I don't want to go. I can't possibly have a good time with your mother." Then Edward completely lost it and lashed out. "Amelia, what the heck are you saying? How long are you going to keep up this childish nonsense? I won't allow you to speak ill of Mom like that. You better reflect on this. It's a vacation abroad for crying out loud, and I want to enjoy it too," he retorted. I was completely shocked. I couldn't believe Edward wouldn't trust me this much. Staying in that house had become nothing but agony for me. To prove to Edward that I was telling the truth, I decided to take action. The next day, since Edward was off work, the 3 of us had breakfast together. That's when I confronted my mother-in-law. "You're trying to leave me out of the trip abroad, aren't you?" My mother-in-law replied defiantly, "Oh, did I say that, Amelia? If you want to come, just come along, right?" But Edward interrupted. "Hey, Amelia, don't you understand yet? Apologize to Mom. Why are you being so defiant? You're not a child anymore. Despite my desire to clear things up and make Edward understand, my mother-in-law insulted me in the worst way. Well, maybe Amelia should just stay home, right? It's too early for someone like you to travel abroad. You won't appreciate the experience with your lack of education. Besides, lazing around at home every day without working. Do you even deserve to go abroad? You know it, don't you? She said. I was shocked that she still believed I was unemployed. I've explained my job to you multiple times, even during our greetings. I've told you what I do, haven't I? I confronted her, but she just looked down on me. What job? Remote work. Don't joke with me. You're just playing on the computer at home. It's been getting on my nerves every day. There's no way you're making money with that. You're just stealing Edward's earnings, she blurted out. That really made me angry, but before I could respond, she went even further. I have Edward, and that's enough for me. Edward can speak Spanish and works at a renowned hotel. There's no need to waste his earnings on a woman like you, uneducated and unemployed. A bottom feeder like you should just leave as soon as possible, she continued. She just kept going. After all her harsh words, I looked at Edward, hoping he would understand. But his response was unexpected. Well, I can understand how Mom feels. Maybe Amelia needs to cool off a bit, he said nonchalantly, as if he was fed up with me. At that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't endure being treated like this by both the mother and son any longer. Even though my mother-in-law told me to leave, I still wanted to confirm. Am I really supposed to leave? I asked. Laughing, she replied. Of course, leave as soon as you can. We don't need bottom feeders like you around. So I said, understood, and began preparing to move out. I simply nodded to the two of them and left the house. As I was leaving, my mother-in-law called after me with a sneer. Enjoy your poor life, as it suits a bottom feeder like you. But they didn't realize that consequences would follow their actions. About 3 months after I left the house, around the time when they were scheduled to go on their trip abroad, my mother-in-law called me. Amelia, I finally reached you. What's going on? She sounded quite frantic. First, I replied, I'm surprised you managed to call this number. She said, Of course, I tried several times and couldn't get through. I even called your parents' house to get your new number. I had informed my parents that either Edward or my mother-in-law might call. If they did, they should call back at this number. What's wrong? I asked in a panicked tone. She said, What's wrong? We're getting all sorts of collection letters. Help me out. I didn't know about any of this. Well, that's expected. You haven't been paying the utilities, have you? I simply answered. My mother-in-law seemed lost in her thoughts. I absolutely thought Edward was covering our living expenses. To find out you were paying for everything, why didn't you tell me? I had no idea you were making that much money. It's a bit late to bring this up now, I said, though perhaps Edward finally told her the truth. That's right. I had already started my own business using the expertise I gained from the travel agency. I used to work for a travel agency, and now my own business had grown to the point of earning $20 million, being widely accepted around the world. What shocked my mother-in-law even more was probably Edward's income. Just because he worked in a lounge at a well-known hotel didn't mean he was making a lot of money. If anything, Edward was just an average worker on the lower end of the pay scale, and speaking Spanish at that hotel was nothing special. There were many Spanish speakers there. Even if he could speak it, it wasn't anything remarkable. There's no way his income could cover the living expenses for 3 people. In reality, just making ends meet for himself was all he could manage. It's ridiculous that she hadn't realized until a collection notice came that I was the one paying all the living expenses for my husband's family. But the more I listened to my mother-in-law, the more shocking facts came to light. The reason why she insisted on me living with them wasn't to keep an eye on her. It was because she had been living off my father-in-law's wealth. Blinded by a temporary influx of cash, she had spent lavishly until there was nothing left. That's when she turned to Edward, presuming he was earning well. But Edward knew his income was low, and he was somewhat aware of my earnings, which is why he turned to me for help. Hearing this only confirmed how irresponsible they were. But their irresponsibility didn't stop there. By the way, are you managing to make the car payments? My mother-in-law exclaimed, raising her voice. Exactly. Both Edward and I have bills piling up since you moved out. I've been receiving more and more credit card statements addressed to both of us. The amounts due each month kept increasing, and before I knew it, they amounted to quite a sum. Their level of luxury spending was beyond me. I have no idea how they were spending without paying the living expenses, but Edward's bills had surpassed his salary, and my mother-in-law hadn't stopped her old habits of lavish spending. It seemed they had both gotten themselves into debt, now totaling over $440,000. What's even more shocking is they thought Edward would somehow manage it if it was just a bit of debt, as my mother-in-law put it, and Edward thought I would take care of it if things got tough. The level of dependency in grown adults was appalling. Beyond exasperation, I was starting to feel the danger. So when my mother-in-law brazenly said, "So, Amelia, you can sort this out for us, right?" I was astonished by her audacity. I made it clear to her, after everything that's happened, you're asking for help now. There's no way I'm helping. That's when Edward suddenly took the phone. "Hey, Amelia, you're my wife. You have a duty to help us out. Do something. We can't pay this off." I couldn't believe their nerve, but I did offer him a glimmer of mercy. "So you want to come over? I might consider it if you do." He was immediately enthusiastic. "Oh yeah, you'll let us stay and you'll sort out the money. Then let's do that. Where's your place?" "I'll head there right now," he said eagerly. I had to be honest. "Well, if you can make it. I'm in Hawaii right now. I have a vacation home here," I said. Both Edward and my mother-in-law couldn't hide their shock. "What do you mean, Hawaii? We can't afford to go there right now." Edward panicked. I calmly replied, "Weren't you planning to travel abroad? Just swing by Hawaii. Your mother would love it. And you did ask my family for my phone number, right? Didn't you realize it was an international number?" I added, "Oh, and don't forget the cost of this call. It adds up if you're on for a long time." To make my point clear, I said if we get divorced, I might think about helping with the money too. Edward quickly replied, "All right, I got it. Let's just get divorced first then." It seems like Edward realized his debts were something he couldn't trade for anything else. So I told him I'd deliver the divorce papers once I got back to California and ended the call. About a week later, I returned to California, made sure to have the divorce papers properly written up, and the divorce went through without a hitch. Edward looked quite worn out, so I guess he's been living pretty lean these last few days. He mentioned something at that time. It turns out he had been counting on my money for the overseas trip as well. Hearing that didn't even surprise me anymore. They probably thought I would pay off their debts, but of course I had no intention whatsoever of doing that. What I proposed was, first of all, for both of them to stop living so extravagantly, and then for Edward and my mother-in-law to work hard. I told them if they did, they could eventually pay off the debt and at least manage the basics. When Edward heard this, he lashed out. "Hey, that's not what you promised. You were supposed to think about the debt." But I was like, "That's why I did you a favor by thinking of a way for you guys to handle your debt repayment. So good luck. Once you can afford to travel abroad again, I'll invite you to my Hawaii villa," I said with a touch of sarcasm and left their place. Afterward, they both seemed to be working themselves to the bone from dawn till dusk, barely scraping by. It's probably a good lesson for them since they've had it easy until now. On a different note, I heard that Jessica also built a house in Hawaii. I had a reunion with her after so long. She took up a job that took her around the world after graduating from middle school, and now seems to be a company president just like me. She had her parents come over to the house she bought, and they are living it up together. So I called my parents over from California, and we started living here. Now, I sometimes visit Jessica's place. We both feel blessed to be able to give back to our parents and encourage each other as we work hard at our jobs.